We are back, and we have in studio today West USA's managing broker, Kyle Fouts. Obviously, the topic of discussion is, I think we're beyond the topic of discussion of NAR and the lawsuit. We're just at the point of how do we implement this stuff? What is real? What is not real? So I thought I'd bring in my broker, Kyle Fouts. And it's important to note that we are, at the time of recording, we are at the end of June. So by the time you listen to this, things could change and things can evolve, and we might have some new answers. So Kyle, a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors, a lot of noise, especially out there on social media amongst real estate agents. What do we know for sure at this point? What do we know about the impending changes to how we do business?
Changes are coming.
Changes are coming.
As we've heard.
All right, folks, we're done for the day.
Thank you. Next question. First of all, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Appreciate you having me be here. But
none of the other brokers were available.
That tracks. I get it. Changes are coming. I mean, what do we know for sure? That on August 1st, MLS is going to remove the compensation field. Essentially, that will push it to buyer's agents to, at that point, have written documentation to secure their compensation. So we won't have this unilateral, unconditional offering of compensation through MLS like we're all, that we've been used to in our business practices in the past. That will change to now going to having written documentation, some sort of buyer-broker agreement, or just a written agreement with the buyer that establishes compensation. This applies to all MLS participants. The buyer-broker agreements have to have a very specified compensation amount. It can't be ambiguous. It can't be open-ended. And it cannot, if your payment from the transaction cannot exceed whatever you negotiate in this document. So whatever that is, I mean, obviously it's going to be in the buyer's agent's best interest to try to negotiate as much compensation on that document as possible, because whatever that figure is going to be, regardless of if you're getting compensated from the seller side during a transaction, you've set your cap through the buyer-broker document. I mean, that's where we're going. I mean, essentially, what do we know? There are new documents coming. We have a new buyer-broker agreement. We have a new broker-to-broker compensation agreement. These are all through AAR. They've finalized the drafts. They will be out in the near future. Like you said, we're at the end of June now. Very early July, these documents will come out. And we'll start training on them and all getting used to them together.
Now, as far as, the way that I view a listing agreement, a ER, it's an employment agreement between myself as a listing agent and the brokerage
Correct.
And the seller. I view the buyer-broker agreement as an employment agreement between me and a buyer. Is the buyer-broker agreement going to be something that we are needing to submit to a seller when we're submitting a contract, or is it fair to say I can tell that listing agent, say, hey, listen, the buyer-broker agreement is an employment agreement between me and my buyer.
Correct.
I am not sending that to you. That is not for your review. There may be additional forms, which I'm not familiar with those forms yet, because I feel like a lot of listing agents are going to be demanding to see that buyer-broker agreement. And my feeling is go pound sand.
I agree with that feeling. It's the same. It would be the same as a buyer's agent saying, let me see your listing agreement, right? As you alluded to, they are very similar documents on opposite sides of the transaction. However, the reality of that is if a seller says, I don't want you, listing agent, to offer compensation or to disclose compensation to a buyer's agent requesting this until they've provided their buyer-broker agreement, well, that puts you in kind of a tough spot, right? I mean, I agree with the theory that I don't want to provide it. However, we have so much to learn about how this is all going to play out.
Yeah.
I mean, we just don't know, and that could be part of it.
So that leads me to the next question: is what myths I gotta say myths. Like I said, there's a lot of noise out there. I think a lot of misinformation. I read a lot of these posts, and I'm reading these posts, and I'm like, how do you know that right now? What are some of the things that you're seeing, you're hearing that we just simply don't have confirmation of, and that agents are spewing over to one another?
Yeah, for me as a managing broker, it's the frustrating part is um, the people out in the world implying that they know how this is going to play out, that they know all the kind of the paths and the facts, and just how the business is going to change when literally none of us like we know the change is coming. That's apparent and obvious. How this is going to look in 6 months, none of us know, and yet people will take other posts, etc., online stuff as gospel, and it's just not. We don't know if it's accurate, and that's frustrating. Um, Myths. I don't know. I mean, I don't. I try not to read into them too much. One of them is that all the buyers are just going to go to the listing agents. They don't. They're not going to ask for representation. They can't afford it, or they don't see the value in it. I don't see that happening. Will that happen to some people, or will some buyers take that tact? Of course. Some buyers already take that tact. Doesn't have anything to do with the change. Now that the compensation, in theory, will be on their shoulders to some degree, yeah, maybe more of them try to go that route, but it's certainly not going to be, in my opinion, an overwhelming majority of buyers. So that fear is, I feel, unwarranted.
Okay. What answers are we, we talked about what we know for sure at this point, and my feeling is we don't know as much. And when I say we, I'm just as an industry, as agents as a whole, we don't know as much as we think we know.
Correct.
What answers are we still waiting for from whether it's a state's local Department of Real Estate, or I don't know if other states have like our AAR online, because I know we have a lot of audience members from different states.
Sure.
I don't know if other states have a document called the buyer broker agreement, and and then I know a lot of people are looking at NAR. Are we still waiting for answers? And there's some things that can still play out that can radically affect us, or do we pretty much know what the game plan looks like, what the blueprint looks like, and now we've just got to figure out the details?
I think the latter is more accurate. I think we, as a general concept, we know where we're going, or what's going to have to happen. What we're waiting for is to see how that will play out. There are many paths where compensation will be offered and paid, and how that will happen. But we don't have any definitive answers on that yet. So that's the wait and see to me. As far as answers from the NAR settlement, I mean, all that's been out for a long time and been parsed through a number of times. Right?
Is the DOJ officially accepted the settlement?
Not that I'm aware of. That's a good point to bring up that I didn't think of. Yeah, the DO, that is, okay, that's a big unknown for all of us, because we're all going through this exercise and having to change based on the settlement. If the DOJ comes in later in the year and makes massive changes to this, this could all be for naught. That is the one concern when you read the stuff about what the DOJ is concerned with. To me, that is, it's like we're going through this, and yet maybe not knowing exactly if this is what's going to be allowed in 6 months.
All right, so this is a Arizona specific question. We have our exclusive buyer broker agreement. Most of us are familiar with that form by now.
Yep.
We know that there are changes and modifications being made to that form. Are you aware of what changes are being made, and how it might look a little bit different, if not drastically different?
It's definitely not. It's not drastically different by any stretch. It's been modified to fit the new narrative a little bit, but if you look at it, and this will be out for Arizona agents next week at some point, so early July, like I said. It's been just clarified and updated. It hadn't been updated for many years, and so now, obviously, with the change that's happening, it was looked at very carefully. But as far as the substantive changes, it's not. It's very similar to how it is now, just a little more clear on that the compensation is fully negotiable. In the current iteration, it says, what's the compensation? A lot of people just put a percentage number there. They put X percent. X percent of what? It doesn't say of the sales price, although we all
It
know
does.
what
You're right. You're right. It
there's
doesn't. Yeah.
So if a savvy buyer argued and said, okay, I agreed to X percent, what of what?
Of my down payment.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, it could be it could be anything. So things like that, we're tidied up just to make sure that it's a better document. But as far as like, huge changes, there really aren't any.
All right. One of the specific questions that I have about potential changes, and I realize you may not know the answer to the question. So, we as agents, there's a lot of concerns that we have. Some of my concerns are buyers aren't necessarily they're aware of something's going on,
Sure.
but they don't know the details of specifically what's going on. They are going to be presented with documents that they're not familiar with, being asked to sign documents.
Agreed.
And some agents, I feel like, and I don't agree with this practice, but they're going to go out and try to get everybody that they come across, whether it's at a Starbucks, a kid's ball game, hey, sign this document, And I know that's a little extreme, but is there going to be a time limit? I have you and your wife sign a buyer-broker agreement with me. Is there going to be a time limit? Could I have you sign it so it's good for 5 years? Is there a 12-month cap? Is there any discussion about that?
There's not that I've heard. I mean, it's an agreement. It's a binding agreement. There is a concept of being reasonable in some. I'm sure through the law, and I'm no attorney. We all know that, but there is some version of reasonableness that needs to be exercised in that document. I don't think that if you sign, shoot somebody over a 10-year buyer broker that. I'm not sure how well that would be upheld throughout that process, but no, I've not heard any caps or anything along those lines. It's a binding agreement amongst the parties that can be negotiated as they see fit. So,
all right. So there is this talk that, and I don't know whether it's coming from NAR. I don't know whether it's a state-specific thing of getting to a point that I, as an agent, I can't even show you a home, walk you into that home without having a buyer-broker agreement executed between us. Is that true?
That is accurate. Yes. When the changes go into effect, which is August 17th, that will be the truth. If you're going to show property to a party and you are an MLS participant, you must have a signed agreement with them.
Is that from NAR?
That is part of the settlement. Yes.
Okay, so would we classify that as a rule or a law?
Rule.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. It's
internally where I'm going with that.
I hear you, but it is an absolute as part of this settlement to comply with the settlement, and so yeah, it'll be necessary for sure.
So then, what about open houses? I'm holding an open house, and it may not even be my listing. So I want to remove that. It's not my listing because I don't want to have a discussion about dual agency here. But it's your listing. You graciously allow me to hold an open house this coming up weekend.
Sure.
And 10 groups of people come in to view that property. Am I going to have each one of those 10 sign a buyer-broker agreement to see that property? Is that the same as showing a home, or is there a distinction? Because that's one of my big concerns.
And I get it, yeah, and that's been brought up a number of times, and I believe the general consensus is that no, that's not going to have to be the case at that particular open house. Now, if they wander through the home and they say, yeah, this is great, but I would like to see others, as soon as that happens and you're taking them elsewhere, then yeah, the buyer or a agreement needs to be had. But I'm hesitating to say the buyer broker because there are going to be a couple of different agreement documents for buyers agents to utilize with their client or with the buyer.
Is that broker specific or is that state specific?
It is state specific. There is the kind of the binding version, the one that essentially they're saying there's like a married version and a dating version. Okay, and there's a buyer broker exclusive employment agreement, which is very similar to what we have now. That is the exclusive one that is binding. But we also understand that there is at times a hurdle in an agent's mind, and also certainly in a buyer's mind. Maybe they just met you. They don't know you. They don't want to be bound to you immediately. They want, it's kind of like a let's feel each other out process. And there is a document that has been created for that. It's I believe it's the buyer broker.
And this is the difference. And I take exception. I personally don't think it's fair to the buyer. I get it. The government doesn't give a rat's ass about us as agents. I fully get that.
That's been made apparent.
I take exception to people comparing the ER to the buyer broker agreement. I take exception to the fact that I cannot take somebody to go look at a house without signing a buyer broker agreement, and people go, well, it's just leveling the playing field. There's nothing different than taking a listing. There's a huge difference.
Correct.
Because I can go into a listing appointment and walk out with nada.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I now can't take a buyer into a house without having them sign a document. So for me, I just think it's unfair to the buyers. It's putting the buyers in unreasonable situations to, one, be found in a situation where they're signing something that they don't understand, and what they're signing might lead to litigation.
It
Might lead to them having to pay an extra $12,000, and they're not really aware of that. But that's neither here nor
But
there.
that also happens now, right? How many times, in my world, getting calls from agents about, I mean, we deal with problems all day, every day. There's been so many, countless times where a buyer has signed a buyer broker agreement as part of a sales package that, they're submitting an offer. Agent sends a package over with 14 documents. One of those is a buyer broker. They don't go through it. They don't read it.
Yeah.
They click, 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 click. And now they're bound to this. I mean, that's not unique to the new
But
world.
at that point, I get that, but they're at the point where they're signing documents.
Correct.
Right?
You're right.
For you to just go see a house with me this afternoon, you're not committed to buying a house. You don't even want to commit to paying me anything. You just want to go see the house.
Right.
So your only option is to say, you know what, I don't want to sign a buyer broker agreement. So now I'm going to have to go look at that house and possibly buy that house unrepresented.
Well, that's where this other document comes in, though.
I can't wait to see the other document.
It's a very parsed down version of a buyer broker, but it's non-exclusive. So originally, Out to the Loop was a non-exclusive version of the buyer broker, and it was kind of labeled that way. This is now called, I believe, the buyer broker showing agreement. And so it allows for a buyer, and one, I mean, they have an obligation to protect their own interests, right? Like, we're all adults. At some point, read what you're signing. If you're not comfortable with it, move on. But on the other end of that, if to answer that type of pushback, the showing agreement would be perfect because it's non-exclusive to the agent, so the agent isn't nearly as secure in their position. However, if the buyer signs it, you go, and it's specific essentially to the properties you show them. If I take you to this property and I write an offer for you on this property, you agree to pay me this.
All right, gotcha. So I wasn't as familiar with that
Yeah,
form.
it's brand new. It hasn't been.
Okay.
It will be.
Okay. All right. Well, I like that. I do like that because because I don't want to put people in that position, so.
Sure.
So now I know we've always been trained that when somebody walks into an open house or we're having a discussion with a brand new potential buyer, we've always been trained to ask them, have they signed anything with another agent? Hinting at the buyer broker agreement.
Correct.
Have they entered into any type of written agreement with another agent? Most of us don't ask that question because, frankly, up until now, the buyer broker agreement was not used that much. Like I say, it wasn't used. I've been using it for a couple of years, but it wasn't as common.
No, not at all.
So, what's our process now? What are we required to do when now working with a new buyer to ensure that they haven't signed something, they have signed something? Has anything changed with that? And then the big question that I'm getting is, you're my buyer. You're like, hey, Mike, you've been my agent for 2 years and we got a great relationship. And I didn't realize this, but I went to this open house. I signed a buyer broker agreement with another agent. I don't even like that agent. I haven't even heard for that agent. How does a buyer get out of a buyer broker agreement? And then what fine line are we crossing by explaining that process?
So to your first question, nothing has changed in the regard of the questions that should be asked of a buyer. That's a code of ethics issue to determine whether or not they are subject to an exclusive representation document. You're right. The buyer broker historically has not been heavily utilized because it was agency disclosure is far easier, non-binding, less threatening to a buyer, just more comfortable. And now that the buyer broker will be mandated. more people will be subject to those exclusive agreements. You still have to ask the question. Second question, you're right. That's the same general concept as a potential seller coming to you that's subject to a listing agreement and saying, hey, I'm not really super thrilled with my current listing agent. Can you help me get out? I want to list with you. I've heard great things, et cetera. So the advice from a broker would be the same. You have to be careful to navigate that. If they were to sign multiple buyer broker agreements, they're now subject to compensation on multiple fronts. They owe different people money.
So definitely rule number one, if this person has signed a buyer broker agreement with another agent,
Yep.
I do not have them sign one with me until they're out of the other one.
Agreed. And for them to be out of the other one, when they say, Mike, what do I do? How do I get out of this one? That's kind of a non-starter. You just have to say, listen, that's between you and that agent. You need to negotiate with them. If you're not getting anywhere with the agent, contact their broker.
Okay.
And see where that conversation takes you. I also am candid with the agent. A broker doesn't have to agree. If someone called us about being frustrated with their agent, our agent, and
have you ever had one of those calls about me?
No.
Ryan?
Maybe Ryan. But the conversation is just, listen, that other broker may not be open to canceling that. I mean, it's as a brokerage, we're going to support our agent. A lot of brokerages are the same way, as long as the agent is appropriately acting. I don't like the agent is different than the agent's done something improper, and things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So now, what is are brokers stressed out? And I'm talking about brokers across the country, not just at West USA Realty, about agents potentially suing buyers. Because people, I see comments and questions that people ask me. Well, we would never sue a buyer, and right, Mike. And I go, I'm not going to say never.
Never say never.
If I have been working with you for 3 years, and we've been looking at $2+ million properties, and I've been working with you for 3 years. I've invested time, money, and resources, and so forth. And then you go cheat on me, but we have a buyer broker agreement. I might. Now, if you walk into my open house and you sign a buyer broker agreement with me, and I've never talked to you, and then you go out, no. But but are you guys stressed out about that?
Totally. I would say I would have that same conversation with an agent who says I'd never pursue it, because you never say never. There are so many different factors that would go into your decision of whether you want to pursue or not. But that example you gave is perfect and right on. I mean, in that situation, I would feel the same way. As far as being stressed out, I don't know that we or that I'm hearing other brokers being more stressed out than it ever has been. It's still going to be an individual decision for the agent on in our case at least. We let that be the agent decision. We would support them however they chose to proceed. They could let it go and just move on, bigger and better things. Or if they wanted to pursue it, we would assign the compensation to them. There's a definite process that goes into this. It's certainly, I'll tell an agent, it's not a simple process. It's not snap your fingers, you get paid. I mean, we're talking litigation. That's no small thing. But in the event that you want to pursue it, we can, explain that path to you.
If I'm an attorney, this is my new business model. I'm marketing to agents. Hey, I don't agree with it, but if I'm an attorney. All right, last question, surprise question. So, and you may not know the answer, and that's okay. But we have a mutual friend works here at West USA. I don't want to name his name, but he's pretty short. So, he seems to think that these attorneys that have brought forth this lawsuit or the Department of Justice, they're like just sitting there waiting like witches, waiting for the next mistake that we make as an industry. What
to pounce?
Well, what you have any insight
pounce
to that?
Again?
Yeah, pounce again, and that would lead to what we need to be very, very careful and wary of.
I understand that theory and that thought. I choose not to dwell on things along those lines because we just don't know. And yeah, the DOJ is concerning to me, of course. That could be a shoe that drops that just changes everything. But I don't play into the conspiracy theory stuff. What do we need to be careful of? This whole lawsuit is based on compensation and a non-understanding of compensation from the parties within our industry and the parties within the transaction specifically. The documents they were already explanatory of this. They already had language that stated that there were no set commissions and that that it was negotiable. They've now been bolstered, that language has, and it's been bolded. Be sure to carefully cover that with your clients. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but to avoid being here again, as long as people are understanding of what we're doing in a transaction, how this all works, and that now it will be made obviously clear. Compensation is fully negotiable amongst the parties. I think we'll be in a good place, but as far as what's going to come next, we shall see.
All right. Kyle Fouts, managing broker, West USA Realty. Kyle, thank you for spending some time with us. Great job.
Appreciate
and
you,
we'll have you back again soon.
All right.